right now.
Mr. President, it is clearly the position of the United States, clearly, I think, the position of the international community that there needs to be two states, a Jewish state of Israel, along with an independent Palestinian state, living side by side in peace. But the only way that that will take place is through direct negotiations between these Palestinians and the Israelis. Prime Minister Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, was here in Washington and spoke before a joint session of Congress. And he laid out very clearly how peace in the Middle East needs to evolve by the recognition by the international community of the Jewish state of Israel and an independent Palestinian state through direct negotiations between the Palestinians and the Israelis. Israel has been one of our strongest allies. They have been a loyal ally to the United States. We share common values, and it's strategically critical to the United States, particularly in that part of the world. It is clear to all that the only way that we will achieve the two-state will be through direct negotiations between the Palestinians and the Israelis. The Palestinians have been reluctant for these direct negotiations, try to use intermediaries. They need to do it directly. Sit down with the Israelis. Negotiate the issues. That's the way to move forward to accomplish their goal. The action they're seeking in the United Nations will be counterproductive. Mr. President, we have gone on record, every single one of us in the Senate of the United States, in Senate Resolution 185, a resolution that I brought forward with my colleague from Maine, Senator Collins. It passed unanimously by the United States Senate. It stated very clearly that if the Palestinians were to pursue this unilateral action through the United Nations, that would not advance the peace process, that it would be counterproductive to the objectives of the Palestinians to establish an independent state. This past week, Senator Collins and I sent a letter to President Abbas, the president of the Palestinian group. We told him that we felt that trying to go directly to the United Nations and circumventing the peace process would be a lack of good faith in peace negotiations, and that it would have repercussions on the United States foreign policy. What we've been told by the Palestinians is that they're going to seek full membership as a state in the United Nations, going to the Security Council. Mr. President, that's not going to succeed. We hope that the Security Council will recognize the inappropriateness of such action and will not take it up or will not provide the necessary support to forward it to the General Assembly. In the unlikely case that it were to get the necessary support in the Security Council, the United States has made it clear that it would veto any such action for good reason, because it would be counterproductive to achieving the objectives of two states living side by side in peace. The Palestinians may go to the General Assembly, and although they can't get full membership, they could try to advance a resolution within the General Assembly of the United Nations. And we know the numbers. We know what could happen. But I must tell you, seeking some form of recognition through the General Assembly, circumventing the peace process and the Security Council, will be harmful to advancing the peace process and the objectives of the Palestinians for an independent state. Let the parties negotiate directly in good faith. Israel has indicated that they're prepared to do that. They have been prepared to do that. Negotiate in good faith through direct negotiations. There are no shortcuts to achieving this, and moving through the United Nations will not achieve those objectives. Mr. President, with that, I would suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Mr. President.
The junior senator from Nevada.
Mr. President, I request consent to dispense with the form.
Objection, ordered.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is an honor serving the people of the great state of Nevada, and today I'm speaking on their behalf for the first time in these chambers in the United States Senate. Before I begin, I'd like to take a moment to reflect on two tragic events that have taken place in Nevada recently. In Carson City, our nation lost 3 Nevada National Guard's members at a local restaurant shooting. Those members were Major Heath Kelly, Sergeant First Class Miranda McElhenney, and Sergeant First Class Christian Reggae. The other was a horrific crash at the Reno Air Races this weekend. As with the shooting in Carson City, this terrible event not only impacted the communities of northern Nevada, but the entire state and the nation. Having visited the scene where the crash occurred, it is difficult to describe the amount of damage that took place there. Our state's first responders and medical personnel did an amazing job in a very difficult situation. My thoughts and prayers go out to all the victims and their families, and wish the injured a quick recovery. I am deeply humbled by the opportunity to stand here today and to address the body as Nevada's 25th senator. Nevada is a small state, but is one that has provided many with a great chance to succeed. Most people know that it was in Nevada where Samuel Clemens began to sign his writings as Mark Twain and reported on the territorial legislative sessions. However, the reason Samuel Clemens came to the Nevada Territory was to follow his older brother, Orion Clemens, who served as the first and only Secretary of the Nevada Territory. That position would later become Secretary of State, a position which I held prior to my service in Congress. Like the Clemens brothers who sought greater opportunities, it is in a state like Nevada where a son of a mechanic can have the opportunity to interact with those who were responsible for governing the state. For instance, as a boy, I delivered the newspaper to then-Governor Michael Callahan. For a time, I went to Sunday school with then-Lieutenant Governor Harry Reid's sons. And I was educated in the same public high school as Senator Paul Laxalt. Our current governor, Brian Sandoval, someone who I used to play organized basketball with. I want to thank Senator Laxalt for his support and Senator Reid for being here today. And although not a Nevadan, I also want to thank Senator McConnell for being here as well. My father's automotive shop was across the street from the Nevada legislature, so many of the legislators would come into my dad's business. I spent a lot of time there as a kid working in that garage, sweeping floors, repairing cars, fixing engines and transmissions. In that shop, I learned the value of hard work and responsibility and the importance of family. I'm proud of what I learned growing up in Nevada. Values from two great parents, good teachers, and good neighbors. Nevada values like faith in God, hard work, honesty, and commitment to family. These are the values that I try to bring to Washington, D.C. every day. Although Nevada has changed over the years, in many ways it is very much the same place as when I grew up. I bring this up today because I recall what it took for my father to keep his business in operation, and I think about what might have happened if he were still in business today. During this time when so many people are hurting, our economy is so fragile, it is important to understand how government impacts our economy and businesses across the nation. While Washington politicians tarnish one another, Americans are still out of work. My home state of Nevada in particular leads the nation in unemployment, foreclosures, and bankruptcies. Nevadans do not want finger pointing. They want jobs. Nevadans do not want political talking points. They want to keep their homes. Nevadans do not want to hear hollow promises. They want to pass on a better future to their children and grandchildren. Job creation and economic recovery should be a bipartisan value. Unfortunately, Washington today is paralyzed by politics and has been reduced to sound bites. Too often it seems we cannot move beyond the politics of today. It appears we're more interested in press conferences than solving our nation's most pressing problems. Issues such as Medicare, which is on the verge of bankruptcy. Instead of strengthening and preserving the program, it is often used as a political weapon. The truth is, Washington has not done enough to get our nation back on track, and the American people know it. I recently received a letter from a small business owner who had this to say: "My business had to dramatically cut our spending and unfortunately lay off half our good employees. Many of our customers have lost their jobs and their homes due to government intervention in the housing market and massive mismanagement of our tax dollars. Government employment has gone up, while private sector employment has dropped." These are the kind of stories that I hear from Nevadans far too often. For over 4.5 years, I do weekly telephone town hall meetings where I have the opportunity to speak with thousands of households across my great state. During a recent round of phone calls, I've been asking participants if they believe their children and grandchildren will have a better economic future than we have today. More than 2/3 of these respondents say no. Many Nevadans believe that the economic burden of our national debt and the impact it will have on future generations will lead to fewer opportunities and less upward mobility. I'm certain that Nevada is not alone in this sentiment. Do we want to be the first Congress that hands our children and grandchildren a lesser quality of life? This should serve as a wake-up call for Washington. Passing a better life to our children and grandchildren is a value and goal we all share as Americans. From all corners of Nevada and our nation, the message is clear. The status quo is not working. We can no longer afford to ignore the biggest problems facing our country: government spending and the national debt. The choices are clear. We can continue down this path, which leads to bigger government, higher taxes, less jobs, and rationed health care for our seniors. Or we can decrease government spending, create jobs, and fulfill our promises to future generations. Washington needs to place its trust in the American people to re-energize our economy, not the federal government. And it was Reagan who said, "From time to time, we have been tempted to believe that society has become too complex to be managed by self-rule. That government by an elite group is superior to government for, by, and of the people. But if no one among us is capable of governing himself, then who among us has the capacity to govern someone else? Our debt will serve as an anchor on future prosperity if we do not work today to solve this problem. Business as usual is not an option. What we do as senators and the decisions we make are critically important to those who we wish to represent. Sometimes the result of our actions are seen immediately. Sometimes the full ramification take decades to unfold. Record deficits, high unemployment, an anemic recovery, inflation are fueling anxiety over our nation's fiscal health. The key to recovery is to create an environment where economic growth can flourish and provide certainty and stability to our nation's job creators. I evaluate legislation through what I call the entrepreneurial standard, or the more, higher, less test. Does this bill provide more competition with higher quality at less cost? What would a small businessman do? If the federal government approached problems through an entrepreneurial perspective, we would have a more efficient government at less cost to the taxpayer. Unfortunately, our government is not providing that certainty today. We have a temporary tax code, overly burdensome regulations, and an ever-increasing national debt. There is no question the federal government must stop spending money we do not have. If we are going to keep America exceptional, we have to chart a new direction for our country. As families across Nevada struggle to pay their bills and fight to keep their homes, government spending has grown exponentially. This must end if we're going to turn this economy around. We must focus on the long-term health of our economy and remove impediments that have caused economic stagnation and disabled businesses from creating new jobs. The federal government has been on a massive spending spree, and it is time for this reckless behavior to end. History offers little evidence that massive deficit finance spending leads to economic recovery. As an opponent of the stimulus and the Wall Street bailout, I believe reining in government spending is critical to economic recovery and the future of our country. The unemployment rate, foreclosures, bankruptcies all represent people who become victims of this recession. There are those who have endured pay cuts to keep their jobs, individuals who are underemployed, and seniors on fixed incomes dealing with the increases in cost of living expenses. No question, times are tough. So the question we must answer is, do we have the courage to overcome partisan divides, work together to solve our nation's problems? While we all may not be members of the same political party or share the same philosophy of government, I believe we're all here to do what's right. In these difficult times, it's more important than ever that we work together, find common ground, and make tough decisions to create jobs and get people back to work. Every day, I go to work to advocate for the great state of Nevada. And every day, I let Nevadans know there was someone in Washington who is on their side. There's not a day that goes by that I do not think about what can be done to create jobs and get our economy moving again. This is not the first time America has endured tough times, and it probably won't be the last. There will be better days ahead. However, it is incumbent upon us to effect change in difficult times to create a better future. Today we're at a crossroads, possibly a defining moment in our nation's history where we must change the way we govern. The window of opportunity is available, but it's growing smaller every day. Mark Twain wrote, "You are a coward when you even seem to have backed down from a thing you openly set out to do." So I ask another question. What is it that we set out to do? I ran for office to make a difference, to leave this place better than I found it. We still are the greatest nation on earth with the greatest form of government. Our best days are yet to come if we act now to return our nation to what made us great. Families, entrepreneurs, community, the American dream. We must stop the mindset that we have all the answers here in Washington, because I can assure you we don't. The answers are out there. They're in places like Nevada, Alaska, Ohio, and perhaps Kentucky. In small towns and large cities across this country, let the American engine fire again. Tear down the barriers to growth and opportunity and launch this great nation into its great next chapter. I stand ready to serve and ready to bring us all together. When my children and grandchildren look back many years from now, it is my hope that history shows we rose to the occasion to ensure their future and the future of our great nation. I am confident we can meet those challenges. Our strength as a nation is bigger than the troubles of today. May God bless the state of Nevada, and may God bless this great country. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the full text of my speech be placed in the record. I yield the floor.
Without objection.
Mr. President.
The Majority Leader.
Mr. President, I congratulate my colleague on his fine speech. I was happy to hear him mention some of my family. I think most everyone in Nevada knows that one of his best friends and my son's best friend, my son Leif, is one of his best friends and vice versa. So congratulations on your first speech. You'll be the first of many, and the first one's always the hardest. After that, it's a lot easier.
The Republican Leader.
Mr. President, let me just add to the remarks of the distinguished Majority Leader, congratulations to our brand new Senator from Nevada, his outstanding inaugural address. He's off to a very fast start representing the people of Nevada and doing a wonderful job, and I congratulate him for an outstanding address.
President,
Senator from
under the leadership of Chairman Baucus, I have the honor of chairing the Senate Finance Subcommittee on International Trade. And that's why I wanted to take just a few minutes, Mr. President, to outline some of the issues that I think are relevant to this important debate about going to bat for workers under the Trade Adjustment Program. Now, in my home state, Mr. President, about 1 out of 6 jobs depends on international trade. The trade jobs tend to pay better than do the non-trade jobs. And so what I've said is my philosophy about international trade is what we ought to do is everything possible to grow things in Oregon and in the country, to make things in Oregon and across America, add value to them here, and ship them somewhere, because this is an extraordinary opportunity we have in front of us in terms of expanding exports. The fact of the matter is, Mr. President, that the American brand, the brand that is attached to American goods, the exports that we send all over the globe, are something that consumers worldwide want. And that's really my first point, Mr. President. More than 90% of the world's consumers live outside the United States. 90%. And they are all potential customers for the products that we make in the United States. More customers for American products means that American businesses have to make more products. To make more products, they go out and hire more workers. Hiring more workers to make more products to sell to more consumers is the upside of the trade debate that we are starting today. Dismantling trade barriers to American exports gives our businesses access to those new consumers. Doing that creates and supports good-paying jobs, jobs that you can support a family on, a family wage job. As I mentioned, trade-related jobs provide better benefits and pay than many of those jobs unrelated to international trade. That's why when we have an opportunity to open markets to American products and American exports, we ought to take advantage of it. Point number 2 is that our successful efforts to open markets are undermined when foreign governments and foreign competitors cheat. And I use that word specifically because cheating is exactly what engaging in unfair trade practices that work to undermine our producers and our innovators is all about. So a central component of our trade policy always has to be enforcement. Enforcement of U.S. trade laws and global trade rules. Senator Snowe, Senator Portman, Senator Blunt, Senator McCaskill, Senator Schumer, Senator Brown, and I have been focused specifically on stopping foreign suppliers from laundering their merchandise to evade U.S. anti-dumping and countervailing duty laws. These are the duties that are put in place, Mr. President, to remedy the damage that unfairly traded imports causes to American producers. Those foreign trade cheats, especially those from China, have been found guilty of dumping their goods in our country. Instead of stopping the dumping or paying the appropriate duties, the Chinese goods are shipped into a country like Korea, where the goods get repacked into boxes that say "Made in Korea" in order to avoid the U.S. trade remedy laws. And all of this, Mr. President, has been occurring under the sleepy eyes of our customs agency. Fortunately, with bipartisan support, the Senate is positioned to act on this matter and address the issue. It will not come a minute too soon, Mr. President. I was just stunned when the staff of my subcommittee on international trade basically set up a sting operation, set up a dummy company, and we were amazed at the number of firms, particularly from China, who basically said, look, we're plenty interested in figuring out how to get around American trade laws. So these foreign trade cheats are out there. They are looking for ways to exploit the fact that the customs agency has not been tough, has not been relentless, particularly not with respect to protecting our manufacturers. And so point number 2 today is to make sure that in the days ahead we put in place a stronger response to trade cheating, where cheats from China and other countries literally launder their merchandise, stamp it as coming from somewhere else in order to avoid our trade laws. The third point, Mr. President, speaks to the bill that we discussed today and especially to the valuable Casey Brown-Baucus amendment that I hope we will be voting on shortly. America's ability to compete in the global economy rests on opening foreign markets, enforcing the trade rules, and preparing our workforce, the American workforce, the workforce on which American businesses depend to be globally competitive for the jobs of tomorrow. That is what TAA, the Trade Adjustment Assistance Program, is all about. Just as over 90% of world consumers live outside the United States, so does over 90% of the world's workers. Although we have the most productive, innovative workforce in the world, sometimes a foreign producer finds a way to do something better or produce something more efficiently than an American one. The result is you can have Americans losing jobs through no fault of their own. So the Congress decided long ago that the best way to respond to global competition was to meet it head-on, to meet it directly. And that's what a trade agenda with a robust trade adjustment assistance program does. Trade adjustment assistance throws a lifeline to the workers and to their families who lose their jobs because we have been open, we have been free, we have been expansionist in the area of trade, particularly when it comes to creating exports. trade adjustment assistance provides American workers with an opportunity to acquire the skills they need to not just become reemployed, but to help American businesses better compete in the global marketplace while those families make their way back to the American economy where they can earn a wage at which they can support their family. Now, trade adjustment assistance is a pretty modest program. The lifeline that is thrown to these workers is modest, just a few $100s a week on average. And the job training that is provided to those workers is typically provided through existing infrastructure like our community colleges. Trade adjustment assistance provides just enough assistance for resourceful and thrifty and industrious workers to rebound from a trade-related, job loss. And that, in effect, is what I hope we can start looking at programs like trade adjustment assistance as being. What we want these programs, Mr. President, to be all about is something of a trampoline where, in effect, you can get a modest amount of assistance and through that modest amount of assistance be in a position to bounce back to the American economy with skills that have been improved and be in a position to again make a good wage at a company that can be involved in areas like exports and productivity and innovation-driven services. Now, for much of the last half-century, the United States vigorously promoted an open and global economy. As a result, our country launched an effort to become the largest, most dynamic market in the world. Today, that global market is more competitive than ever before. The rise of China and India and other emerging markets, such as Brazil and Russia, provide extraordinary opportunities to our innovators and our producers. But we don't get to be the top economy, Mr. President, as a result of some kind of entitlement program. We've got to constantly work at it. We've got to constantly work at the task of making more innovative and more productive goods and services. Together, federal government officials, businesses, and workers have the opportunity to seize the possibilities that a global economy provides and also overcome its challenges. And certainly it is more important than ever to do that in the face of growing foreign competition. That means joining again now, Mr. President, on a bipartisan basis to support trade adjustment assistance. I would just like to note, Mr. President, having been involved in these issues here since I came to the Senate, trade adjustment assistance has historically been a bipartisan program. It's been a program where the Congress, Democrats and Republicans, consistently said we can look at trade, we can look at exports as a vehicle for more family wage jobs here in our country, making things here, growing things here, adding value to them here and shipping them somewhere. But certainly in an ever-changing world, we are going to see some of our workers needing the opportunities to upgrade their skills that trade adjustment assistance allows. So I very much hope that my colleagues will support the Casey Brown-Baucus amendment. It has my full support. It is very much in the spirit of the bipartisan work that has been done on trade adjustment assistance in the past. And, Mr. President, I see other colleagues waiting to speak, and with that, I would yield the floor at this time.
The Senator from Alabama.
Mr. President, yesterday the President provided a fiscal plan on paper that he said reflects his latest fiscal vision for the country. Seems to be about the fourth vision we've had this year. And he has said we need to be honest with the American people and talk straight to them. I certainly believe that is correct. And I would share some thoughts about the President's plan and express disappointment that he has not been honest and direct with the American people, has not discussed in sufficient depth, in my opinion, the nation's need to reduce spending because our debt is surging larger than it ever has in our history and presents a danger today and in the future. The President needs to talk more about that. If we're going to ask American people to reduce their spending, to take less from the government, to tighten belts, then we need to know why. And I do believe that he has not been sufficiently informative in his conversations because many of them emphasize increasing investments in various programs and spending programs that he has advocated. But with regard to the plan that was introduced yesterday, he claims it would increase the fiscal year 2012 deficit by $300 billion. That's next year. It would increase the debt $300 billion. But he says it would reduce deficits over the next 10 years, in the out years, by $3.2 trillion. Now, we know that what happens now happens. Spending that occurs today, the money is out the door. And promises to raise revenue in the future become less certain as each year passes by. But assuming this is true, assuming we would actually do in the next 10 years the kind of things that would pay for this short-term spending, I would advise my colleagues that the fundamental claim the President is making, assuming his numbers are correct and we do the things he suggests, it overstates by $1.8 trillion the amount of the savings. 3.2? No. 1.8 reduced from that, and you're looking at about $1.4 trillion in savings and not 3.2. That's the fact, and I will share with my colleagues the sad, grim fact of that. How did it happen? Well, the bill, as the Washington Post said, is being criticized, and it's because of gimmicks that are in it. First gimmick, the war funding gimmick. The plan shows $1.1 trillion over 10 years in savings from putting a cap on war spending costs. But those costs are going to decrease as the war effort unwinds, whether or not this proposal is in place or not. They've long been planned. The President's proposed caps on war spending manipulate baseline concepts to show the savings that have been long planned as new, something he came out with this week, I suppose. New policy choices, which inflates the spending cuts in his plan. In other words, it inflates the amount of spending that he's cut by $1.1 trillion. Now, Congress has dealt with this little gimmick in the budgetary process. I serve as ranking member on the Budget Committee, and we wrestle with these baselines and scoring possibilities. But that gimmick, the $1.1 trillion gimmick, was rejected during the recent debt ceiling debate, raising the debt limit. We just talked about that and didn't do it because it's not an accurate explanation of cutting of spending. We don't have any plan to continue to spend in Iraq and Afghanistan the $158 billion we spend this year. For 10 years? Give me a break. That's never been our plan and shouldn't be assumed as a baseline of spending, and claiming credit for it not continuing is not a legitimate way to analyze how much you've cut spending. Some have said that Paul Ryan and the House Republicans, when they passed their budget, included the $1.1 trillion when they said they reduced spending by $6.2 trillion. They proposed a budget to cut $6.2 trillion. They also proposed a growth-oriented tax reduction and simplification plan that would create economic growth, netting out a $4 trillion in actual savings. But Paul Ryan and his committee did not, I've checked the numbers, he did not consider $1.1 trillion in war saving, which no one has disputed should occur off the present amount we're spending. He did not include that in the $6.2 trillion. He did have an alternative analysis that showed that, and people have seized upon that to say his fundamental proposal of a 6.2 spending reduction included it. It did not. Another big gimmick, one that's been used too often in this body, is what we call the doc fix. The Medicare, the Balanced Budget Act in the late 90s proposed substantial reductions in physician fees, and as the years have gone by, it's become more and more plain that doctors cannot sustain a 20% reduction or more in their fees for doing Medicare work. And so each year we put that money back in, but it's part of the plan of a long-term budget. The statute itself has not been changed. And so every year we've got this little problem. Where are you going to cut the doctors 22%? Or are we going to avoid cutting the doctors 22%? Well, we don't want to cut the doctors that much. They'll quit. They can't function. It's too much. That is a too big a cut for them. So we find the money some way every year. Mostly we've just borrowed it. But the President's plan assumes that money will be found for the doc fix, and they will do it over 10 years to the tune of $293 billion. This trick counts the higher spending as a given rather than as a policy choice that needs to be offset. And without this gimmick, the health care savings of $320 billion that the plans suggest will occur. The President says he's going to save $320 billion from health care, and you don't save $293 because of this gimmick, because it's unpaid for. There's no source of income to pay for the President's assumption that we'll pay $293 billion. Then he only saved $27 billion in health care, not $320. I believe this is a truly honest and fair analysis of the President's proposal. It's incorrect, putting it kindly. Then there's another little gimmick. When the President talks about cutting spending, we're cutting spending. Well, what does he include in that? He's counting as spending reductions the net interest effects of his proposed policy changes, even though interest costs are the secondary effect of the proposed tax hikes. For example, if you raise taxes and don't cut spending, and spending has not been cut in this plan, you raise taxes and you reduce projected deficits, we think about $1.4 trillion under the plan, less than half of what was projected. Then you don't pay as much interest because you don't accrue as much debt. You don't pay as much interest on the debt that's not accrued. They're scoring that as if they cut spending, when really it's just a natural byproduct of increased taxes. So when you remove the accounting tricks and the Washington gimmicks that have contributed to this country being in the fiscal condition we're in, you're left with only half of the $3 trillion in deficit reduction the White House promised. The White House also claims the President's plan is $2 in spending cuts for every $1 in tax hikes. $2 in spending cuts for every $1 in tax increases. Indeed, early in the year, he suggested we should have a plan that would be $3 in spending cuts for every $1 in tax hikes. But is this accurate? Is it really true that we are achieving $2 in spending cuts for $1 in tax hikes? If you eliminate the gimmicks, you'll see that it's absolutely not true. under the plan, total federal spending, including the jobs plan stimulus bill, the new stimulus bill, will increase under the President's plan, not decrease. Total federal spending will increase, not decrease. There's no cut in spending. On balance, there's not a penny of net spending that is cut on net. In a speech, the President said, quote, "I'm proposing real serious cuts in spending. When you include the $1 trillion in cuts that I've already signed into law, these would be among the biggest cuts in spending in our history," close quote. That's just not true. It's just not accurate. And I don't think it bodes well for us to be able to reach an agreement on these very serious issues if the President is pretending that his plan cuts the war cost or counts interest that shouldn't be counted or proposes that we fix a dock fix without any money to fix it with. Those are the kind of things that get us in trouble. Despite the substantial increase in taxation under the President's plan, deficits would not be tamed. At no point over the next 10 years would deficits be smaller in nominal terms than the $459 billion recorded before he became President. That's the highest deficit in history. Under President Bush, $459 billion at the time. He was roundly criticized for that. The lowest deficit under today's plan, the lowest over 10 years, would be $476, and in the out years it would start going back up again under the plan they proposed, leading to a $565 billion deficit in 2021. And by the way, the last 3 years of deficits have been $1.3 trillion, $1.2 trillion, and this year will be $1.4 trillion in debt, $1,400 billion. So next year's deficit will actually surge beyond the current projections. We had hoping that they would come down, but because of the new spending in this plan, $350 billion will be added to the deficit next year, putting us well over $1 trillion in debt again, a deficit again next year. At a time when we should be reducing deficit spending, the immediate impact of the plan will be to increase spending, fostering more fear and uncertainty in our economy, more of a conclusion among the financial investors here and worldwide that we still haven't gotten the message and we're still out of control. Over 10 years, deficits would total, the next 10 years would total $6.4 trillion, and gross federal debt would grow by $9.7 trillion. Gross federal debt would grow by $9.7 trillion, exceeding the debt would total over $24 trillion in 2021 when we last year had about a $13 trillion debt. That would keep us over our debt being over 100% of GDP. Properly accounting for the effect of the President's proposed policy changes, the actual amount of debt reduction proposed by the President is $1.4 trillion, consisting of $146 billion in spending increases that would increase the debt and $1.5 trillion in tax increases. So we may have raised a few weeks ago our legal debt limit and allowed us to run up more debt, but we have breached our economic debt limit. America's $14.5 trillion gross debt that we have today is 100% of our economy. A prominent study from economists Rogard and Reinhart, praised by Secretary Geithner as excellent, shows that when the nation's gross debt reaches 90% of GDP, it loses on average a percentage point or more in GDP growth that year. Our debt is depressing growth. Our debt is now 100% of GDP. and our growth is unexpectedly slow this year. Could that be a part of the cause? Some economists say no, but it certainly is consistent with the projections in their plan. So the plan is presented, I have to say, is gimmick piled upon gimmick, added up to little more than a tax hike camouflaged as fiscal restraint. Promised spending control is nowhere to be found. When you're in a crisis, you must deal honestly with the American people. You must present the facts along with a credible solution and call on the people to respond and sacrifice together. Americans are good, decent, hard-working people who will accept a difficult choice if given to them in honest terms, but the White House is trying to be clever at the expense of being credible. The debt is destroying jobs today, I believe, and if we're going to restore confidence and growth, credibility in the President and Congress is one asset we cannot afford to borrow against. I thank the Chair and would yield the floor.
The Senator from Alabama.